OH? Exactly. Exactly. And you guys all know how to respond to that because you're here and you know what to do. But did you know that there are places in this country that don't know how to respond to that? It's incredibly shocking to me as well. It's shocking to me that when I'm in a store and I'm trying to avoid someone, I'll either hear or say, oh, let me scooch around you real quick. That's a Midwestern dialect. And again, that doesn't happen everywhere, but it happens in places like here. And it's always fascinating to see regional dialects because it solidifies you as part of a group and that you belong to something. See, for as long as human beings have been gathering into groups, the other thing we have been doing, aside from gathering into groups, is excluding people. And we see this all the time. We see it in schools, and we hear stories of kids getting excluded because they're not wearing the right clothes or they're not doing the right thing in accordance to what more people are doing. We see this in society where people are marginalized by the color of their skin or by some other thing. Because the one thing that we like more than gathering into groups is to exclude people from that group. Because when you gather into a group, what you're doing is you're saying, these are my people, these are the people that I belong with. And what happens if enough people join in that group? You become the majority. And as you become the majority and as your group grows, you gain power. And so naturally, in order to keep the power into a small centralized group, you have to exclude people. You have to say, these are the people that are in the group, these are the people that are out of the group. And it happens all the time. And it's quite sad and depressing that it happens all the time because, we can poke fun at it and make fun of football rivalries and things like that. But when these things are extrapolated into a much grander scale, the fact of the matter remains. Not everyone is a part of the group. And it's sad that human beings have such a great tendency to divide themselves, to make people who don't fit in feel less than they are. For example, it's crick, not creek. That's how I say it, except there's one creek, and that's Beaver Creek, because that's a proper name of the one specific creek. But you don't go down to the creek, you go down to the crick unless you go to Beaver Creek. It makes sense to me. And that's how I talk. But when you say things in other places, you get looked at weird. And they know that you're not from there. And that creates a rift and a division. It's incredibly sad, the ways that we divide ourselves, because I think this is a problem that Paul is addressing in the epistle lesson today. Paul begins by using one word over and over and over again, and that word is mystery. Now, we know what mystery is. It's something kind of unknown. It's something that needs to be figured out, because not a lot of people know it. And this mystery, how God acts and why, has been made known to Paul so that it may be known to others. Great starting point. We totally understand that because that's why we're here. The mystery of God and God's grace and God's love has already been revealed to us. We understand it. We get it. That's why we come to worship. That's why we're on boards and committees and all of these other things, because we get it. But he goes further. And he goes further to say that this mystery wasn't made known to humanity until Jesus Christ. So the answer to the question, why are we here? What are we supposed to be doing? The only reason that came about, the answer came about to that, is through Jesus Christ. So when someone asks you, what is the purpose of life? You just say, Jesus. And you are technically correct. But what's shocking here is that Paul says that this mystery is not just for the Jewish people anymore. That he has been given the order to bring this knowledge to the Gentiles, and this is an earth-shaking revelation, especially for the time. Thousands of years ago, there was a guy named Abraham who hung out with God, whom God said, I am going to create a nation out of you, and your people will be my people, and I will be their God. And this covenant gets reinforced throughout the ages with people like Noah and people like David. All of these things bound up into God saying, these are my people, and I am their God. The Israelites, the Jewish people, the chosen people of God. That's who Paul served. And we see this in Paul's history because, as we know, Paul was also Saul, and he was, as he calls himself in other epistles, the most Pharisee of Pharisees, the super Pharisee, if you will, someone with such a zeal for the law because he could trace his lineage, and he knew where he came from, and he was a part of the group. He was on the inside. And so he knew more than other people. And so when this upstart Jesus Christ shows up and all of these people start saying these radically different things about God and questioning and challenging Paul's worldview, he does what any good Pharisee would do and hunts them down to get rid of them one way or the other. And Paul was good at his job. But then he meets Jesus, and his life is drastically changed. Because at that point, he gets it. He understands the mystery of the world now. But what's mind-blowing here is not just Paul's conversion, but it's what we read in our epistle reading today. That through that, his mission was to go to the Gentiles, those outside of the chosen people of God, and bring this message to them so that they too might know and understand the mystery of God. It's a huge change and departure from the way things have always been done. Because Paul, for the longest time, understood he was Jewish, he was a Pharisee, he was part of the chosen people of God. He was of Abraham's line, and that meant God liked him more than anyone else, except when God didn't do that anymore. And God's grace and God's mercy was open to the Gentile people. And that's why we're here. Because we're not the Jewish people. We are the Gentiles. We are the Goyim. And we have been chosen and adopted into God's family. Not because of anything we did, but because God wants us to be a part of God's family. See, the person of Jesus Christ opened the floodgates to where you didn't have to be just born in a certain clique or do certain things. It was literally just, I love you, I want a relationship with you. And it wasn't just for a few people, but it was for all people. Because as we read in John 3:16, which I'm sure we all have memorized, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, whosoever shall believe in him shall not perish, but have life eternal. Did you see what the word choice was there? And it doesn't matter what translation you use, it will always be very, very similar. It is not for God so loved just a select few number of people. It was that for God so loved the world. And the world is made up of more than just one tiny small group of people. The world is made up of all peoples. This is the mystery of Jesus Christ. This is what is supposed to be happening with the world. And this is the message that the Gentiles need to have. Because Paul believes he's right. And if Paul believes he's right and he has the keys to salvation for people and the way that they may come to know God, he has a moral obligation and responsibility to tell everyone. And not just a select few, not just the ones who get it, but everyone. Now this brings us to the question of why. Why is God doing this now? Why has God changed things? And what's really interesting is that the answer to that is yes, and can be found in the story of Epiphany. The story of Epiphany is when the wise men come. And we assume that there's three, because as we'll sing later, it's we three kings, right? So there has to be only three. Except, technically, we don't know how many were there, but we say we three kings. But we say the Magi, we say the wise men. But the text refers to them as astrologers from the east. And not like those weird astrologers we find today where, they're like, oh, if you're a Pisces, you're kind and loving and all this other stuff. No, like actual astrologers who chart the stars and believe that the path of the stars has a true bearing on people's lives. And so when they see the star rising, they're like, what? They get confused. And the reason they get confused is because, more likely than not, these men are Zoroastrian priests. Now, Zoroastrians, that is a religion that is quite similar to Christianity, because their main prophet, Zoroaster, was born of a virgin at about 15 years of old, started his ministry when he was about 30, and you can see how that story is really similar to the gospel truth of Jesus Christ, except that there was a loophole in their faith, and the loophole was that he said other virgins would conceive and give birth to a child, and they would be a prophet. So they're right there. They're so close to getting it already. Even though they might be a little bit different, even though they might have gotten there a different way, they seek the one who is born the King of the Jews. And so they follow the star and they go to Bethlehem, which is the center for the Jewish people. And they go to the king. Because surely the king surrounds himself with really smart people. The king of the Jewish people currently would be waiting for the Messiah, right? The one who is going to fix everything, the one who's going to save everything, and rule over God's people. They would logically be waiting. And so they go to Herod, and they said, where is the child born king of the Jews? We saw the star, and we want to pay him honor. And Herod loses his mind. In fact, the text reads, all of Jerusalem is in an uproar and worry, because this is political ramifications. Because the land isn't just their land. They're a part of the land, yes, and they live on the land, but they also have to deal with the Romans. And so Herod, as a king, is only king in name, and he's really a figurehead person, but he still has power. And he wants to keep that power. And the people of Jerusalem, they want to keep their power as well. They want the status quo to be the status quo. So they figure out that the baby is going to be born in Bethlehem. And he calls the wise men, the Magi, the kings, whatever you want to call them. He calls them up and he says, hey, so go to Bethlehem. When you find the baby, let me know, because I really want to meet this kid and I want to pay homage to him too, which is an absolute lie. Because what we know later is that Herod commits terrible atrocities in order to try to keep and maintain his power. And so what happens are these wise men go, and they keep following the star, because that's what they do. That's how they live their lives. That's their worldview. That's what they know. And they go and they see baby Jesus and they see Mary and they honor him and they respect him and they kneel before him and they give him the gifts of a king. That's why the gifts are mentioned and named important. You got gold, a status kingly thing. You've got frankincense, which is very much this... it's this incense that's used and burned in temple things. So that's showing that they know that this kid is a king. That's showing that they know that this kid is divine. But then they give him myrrh, which is the creepy gift, because the myrrh is a funeral thing. And it's used to prepare bodies. Pointing to the fact that this child is going to be the atoning sacrifice for all people. And then they get ready to leave, and they have a choice to make. And they're told in a dream not to return to Herod because Herod has less than altruistic motives for wanting to meet this kid. And now they have committed a giant political blunder because they were dignitaries from another country coming in, being told to do something by the king, and they didn't do it. They left and went another way because they knew what they were supposed to do. Now, the reason that this is all fascinating is because it contrasts two different people and two different groups. You have the wise men who are viewed of as the outsiders, the visitors of the east of the Orient. And you have King Herod and all of the scribes and the Pharisees. And yet each one of them reacts differently to the birth of Christ. You see, Herod is already Jewish. He should already know how important the Messiah is, and he should be waiting and willing for this Messiah to come, because that's what was prophesied many years prior to this. He should know these things because he's on the inside. But he's so far inside the group, inside the clique already, that he can't help but want to keep that power. Meanwhile, it's the outsiders, the foreigners from another country that come and give Jesus the proper honor and respect that he is due, that he is owed. He wants to be known by us. That's the mystery. That's the mystery. And it's the outsiders who get it. And it's fascinating because, as we talked about during Christmas and the birth of Christ, it was the outsiders that got the news first. It was those on the fringes, those left out of the normal everyday conversations, the people who weren't in it, so to speak. It's a message for everyone. Not just the people who get it, not just us, but for everyone outside of these walls. I see a lot of churches have what I call the stained glass window problem. And it's not that stained glass windows aren't beautiful. I adore stained glass windows. I love stained glass windows. It's a good Presbyterian thing to have stained glass windows. But you can't see through them, can you? Oh, sure, they're great to look at. I absolutely love them. And as I'm talking about it, I'm looking around at all of these, and I'm in awe at how beautiful they are. But we can't see what's on the other side of them. We lose sight of what's out there. When we leave here, we're going to be out there. We're not going to be in here. And as soon as we leave those doors, we enter the mission field. And just like there are people that don't know how to respond when someone says OH, just like there are people that will laugh at you if you say crick and not creek, there are people that don't know the saving power of Jesus Christ. So what are we going to do about that? That's the question. That's the question for us today. Who are we going to be like in this story? Are we going to be like Herod and sit around thinking we already have the answer? We're good to go. We don't have to worry about anything else because we're in already. We get it. Or are we going to be like the wise men? Are we going to be like those who come to know Jesus? See, here's the thing. We already are like the wise men because, again, we're the Gentiles. We're the Goyim. We're the ones who got adopted in to the family. But we forget that. We forget that sometimes. That God's grace has been extended to us through Jesus Christ. We forget that because it's just something we do over and over and over again. And when you do things repeatedly and repeatedly, they sometimes can lose meaning. But we need a reminder that we're the original outsiders. Because we came to God not through being born into God's chosen people, but through Jesus Christ. And if God does that for us, if Christ did that for us, is that same grace and love not extended to all people? Regardless of how they look, regardless of how they act, regardless of what they believe. Because God so loved the world. Not just one small group of people, but the world. I say, if we want to make this a good year, that's what we focus on. We focus on shining the light of God in those dark places to the people who need to see that light, because we already see the light and we know how great it is, and we want other people to see it. And I think that's where we go in this new year. We go forth boldly, shining the light of God in all places to all peoples. Amen.